It's been a couple weeks, so we got a new playtest for Squad. Playtest 4 featured several changes and adjustments based on all the playtests that have already happened, so I'm curious about your thoughts. So hit the subscribe button, leave a comment down below with what you think of the newest playtest, and let's jump to it because I think we have a few things we should discuss. In my recent video, Work in Progress, we discussed Playtest 3, and I wasn't the biggest supporter of where things were in that playtest. And that's not the intention behind the changes that are coming with the Infantry Overhaul mechanics. However, it's more so where the changes are in terms of implementation and some of the tweaks they're making. Obviously, this is all work in progress, and some of this will be polished out by the time we hopefully get to the eventual release. But in the meantime, it's worth a discussion. It's worth creating some feedback that hopefully the devs can listen to and something to talk about amongst the community, which we're all allowed to have. Comments focused on telling people to go to Call of Duty or play Battlefield, you're basically just jumping to one side and maybe not even listening to the points that the person is making because you feel like they don't want it to exist, when already this playtest is divisive in some way or another. And ultimately, you only have a percentage of the squad player base actually trying the playtest. You have tons of people that are going to be introduced to this when it releases for the very first time. It's really important to have these discussions and to find ways of improving the game by giving good feedback. So let's talk about my overall impressions. Before we jump into the changes they made from Playtest 3 to Playtest 4, or the mechanics, I need to highlight the fact that performance was rough in this playtest. I had a lot of frame drop and it was eating up my GPU without really doing much of anything. And despite changing settings and moving from high to medium, I was still faced with these issues. In fact, it was really taking up most, if not all, of the GPU in any given situation. So you may see some playback areas that feel a little choppy, and that is pretty representative of what I was seeing and what I was dealing with while on the battlefield. I would say this is the biggest performance drop I've seen since doing the playtest. I saw most notably some with Playtest 3. I didn't notice a ton with Playtest 1, although it was there a little bit, but this was significant. So let's talk about some updates they made to Playtest 4. First of all, they added the Canadian Armed Forces faction and their weapons to the Overhaul. It seems like the Canadian faction is leaning more in the area of relying on magnified scopes through most of their weapons kits, with less focus on iron sights and holographic sights. One area of focus that they made some updates to was very welcomed in the eye strain and motion sickness mitigation. This was an area of most of my feedback, right? I was starting to see areas where I was getting motion sickness, and I don't typically get motion sickness, especially with how some of the scoping was working with the blur, along with a little bit of the head bob that is pretty frequent still. Now, there's also a significant amount of other changes, including weapon adjustments, general adjustments, UI adjustments, visual updates, stuff that wasn't in the playtest before that are like little details that they've added, along with new audio, and of course, bug fixes. Now, one area of focus that we've talked about a lot is probably the main thing out of this, and that's ADSing. I spent a significant amount of time in the field actually playing rounds with this update, and I can say this is probably the best feel I've had for the most part with ADSing. I felt it was way easier to track targets through the scope, especially when firing. This process felt much smoother than it had in Playtest 3. I felt often in Playtest 3, as soon as I started firing, I lost my targets. Not all the time, but just enough to make it very difficult to be able to hit anything that wasn't just standing perfectly still, clueless that you were looking at them. Now, with performance issues, sometimes this was a little more difficult to do, and it was kind of a bummer to see the performance issues because I felt like I was starting to dial in how to use an ACOG or magnified scope on a rifle. And it was with this playtest, I felt like there was a learning curve. There was the way that you could improve your ability without it feeling so insurmountable like it did sort of in Playtest 3. Now, while a learning curve is expected, I felt like I was on the path to getting better, which is my point. It wasn't, I can't figure this out. It was more so like as I played, I started to understand it a little more effectively. Although I did have plenty of instances where I'd used too much stamina and aiming was not going super well. I was often missing a target despite feeling like I was pretty much on it. Recoil didn't seem as drastic. I was able to track targets much more efficiently. In Playtest 3 with recoil, it was often very disorienting from shot to shot, whereas in Playtest 4, I felt like I was still able to track fairly well without it interrupting that process. I will say the stamina penalty is pretty intense. It's something you have to become accustomed to. Anything below half stamina just felt really difficult to focus and aim, and you were delaying yourself from entering a combat situation to try to recoup that stamina. So there were times where I'd use stamina and then go to ADS and I would have nothing through the scope. In fact, for a moment there, I'd have just black. And one area of stamina regen they seem to have had an issue with implementing was regenerating after being revived. I'm not really clear on how this was affecting the playtest, although I did notice multiple times that I had just 0 stamina after being revived with 0 ability to regain stamina. I believe this is just a bug that they're trying to work out, but in the field, it was painful to deal with. So overall, ADS felt much more comfortable. I felt like I was able to use the weapon a little bit better. And of course, there's still instances where it is very, very difficult to handle your weapon. Now, if we jump to character movement, which is another big aspect of this infantry overhaul, it's very, very clear. It's becoming so prominent that you're going to have to use vehicles differently moving forward. I'm sure many of you have noticed that if you're not utilizing vehicles well in this playtest, you are super slow at being able to attack positions or get back to defend. I think this plus suppression are where the most teamwork elements are added because of the changes to mechanics. If your opponent is capable of utilizing light Vics, maybe IFVs to help transport troops, they're going to be much more efficient at attacking, whereas if you're stuck having guys walk from point to point, you're going to be in trouble after a while because A, you just don't have enough stamina and you're not regening the same way. I think it's paramount to use these vehicles to get troops from one point to another. Plus, it gives them the ability to get to a place while maybe taking light arms fire without being suppressed and held down for very long. And of course, all this exists currently in the live version of the game, however, it is amplified in the playtest given some of the changes with the mechanics. Now we should talk about suppression. It's becoming very, very apparent as these playtests have gone on how to utilize this mechanic to your advantage. There was multiple times where enemies had a position that was affecting someone in our squad. For example, they just had better positioning or we just really didn't have an angle of attack. By applying a little suppression fire into that area or close to them, we were able to keep them subdued until we could reposition. Coordinating with the squad in order to do this became a lot of fun, and it's probably where we saw a huge bump in teamwork because we knew that the mechanic was effective in doing what we were trying to do. Now on the flip side of that, there were times where it was a little too effective. I'm still having issues where in certain situations, bullets are flying by and my head just keeps bobbing. It's not so much that I'm being suppressed at all, as it's just this repetitive motion of my head jerking around. It sort of reminds me of a scene from Night at the Roxbury. Old movie, not very good, but accurate portrayal of how I felt. With all this in mind, mortars. Mortars are going to be another huge asset to utilize suppression. For example, on one layer that we played, we had another squad putting mortars on a hill where an enemy hab was. 4 to 5 of us were able to push into that area despite the amount of enemies we had in that space, and we were able to push the objective and take down the hab. This was due to the fact that the mortars were able to disorient and keep the enemy pinned down so that they couldn't advance away from the hab. They were running away from the mortars and into our gunfire. It worked out perfect. So my overall impressions of this playtest are much better than what I saw in 3. Something about it just feels and resonates closer to what I expected maybe 3 to be. I think the key areas I hope to see a lot more polish and work go into, especially as we continue to do playtests, is performance, obviously. And of course, I hope that we continue to polish ADSing and scoping when using like magnified scopes, for instance, ACOGs. And I realize that not in every fight I'm supposed to have some advantage. I do understand that in certain situations, I'm going to be at a strong disadvantage based on how I get there or where I'm maneuvering or if I've been attacked already and I'm trying to recover. I just hope to see variations within this playtest that still give you the ability to conquer some of that on occasion. Almost the ability to adapt to the scenario a little bit faster so that you still have a fighting chance and you aren't just completely discouraged in certain battles. Now, if you haven't been a part of the playtest yet and you're curious about joining it, it's very simple. If you own Squad, you can download the Squad public playtest game. It's like a separate file in Steam. It should be in your library in a separate install entirely, but you can go in there and you can actually go to the gun range and check out some of the guns in between the playtests. It's just the live servers aren't available until the playtest weekend, which typically is going to be on Saturdays through Mondays when OWI actually announces another playtest. So I'll be on the lookout for the next playtest, and hopefully I can provide another video with some insights over what I saw in case you were unable to join or you're just interested in hearing another perspective. So be sure to hit the subscribe button, leave a comment down below with your thoughts on the playtest, like the video, and I'll catch you next time.